167 years separate the reign of Alfonso X and the birth of Queen Isabella. Over this time, there have been 9 different kings, but although many things happened during their reigns, the Reconquista did not make much progress. I will not explain every single reign in much length, and will rather only focus on the Christian advances on the Muslim territory. The Christians captured Tarifa in 1292. Although the Christians had managed to capture this city, the Muslims quickly mobilized and besieged it. The man defending Tarifa was Alonso Pérez de Guzman, known as Guzman the Good. He is well known in Spanish history for a heroic story. The Muslims had managed to capture Guzman's son, and they threatened the father to kill him unless he surrendered the city. According to the legend, Guzman replied, "I did not beget a son to be made use of against my country, but that he should serve her against her foes. Should you put him to death, he will confer honor on me." Then, he threw a sword over the walls of the city to kill his son. The Muslims killed him, but the city was held. Fernando IV took the throne in 1301, and 8 years later, he found himself at the head of a united Christian army, eager to conquer more land. As a result, Pope Clement V granted Fernando a tenth of the ecclesiastical revenue of the kingdom for 3 years in order to fund the war. The siege of Algeciras, however, required even more funding, and Fernando was forced to pawn the jewels and crown of his wife to solve his budget problem. After a 6-month siege, which was untenable for both sides, the Muslims agreed to pay Fernando a large sum of money in exchange for lifting the siege. Fernando went back home, having failed to conquer Algeciras. Nothing else really happened for the next 30 years until the year 1340, when the Marinid dynasty, which now ruled North Africa, gathered a strong army and crossed the Strait of Gibraltar in a final attempt to undo what the Christians had conquered in the previous century. After defeating a Christian fleet at Gibraltar, they advanced towards Tarifa and besieged the city. Alfonso XI, known as the Avenger, who was now king of Castilla, hearing of this, gathered an army, together with the kings of Aragon and Portugal, and met the Muslims near Tarifa, at the Salado River. The Christians had around 20,000 men, while the Muslims were 60,000 men, at minimum. The Christians were outnumbered 3-1. This battle could have been disastrous for the Christians, but surprisingly, it only lasted 3 hours before the Muslim army started retreating. The pursuit from the Castilian and Portuguese troops was ruthless, sacking the Sultan's rich camp and killing many of his wives. The Sultan himself took refuge at Gibraltar, and that same day crossed the strait and stayed in Africa. This was the last time in history that a Muslim army would conquer parts of Spain. This victory emboldened Alfonso, who besieged Algeciras in 1342. This siege would last 2 years. It marked the first recorded use of cannon in Europe by the Muslims in Algeciras. News of this siege started to spread throughout Europe, and after 1 year, Alfonso received reinforcements from England, from France, from Germany, and from Navarra. Alfonso pawned his crown and melted many of his silver belongings to fund the effort. The Muslims, recognizing the importance of this siege, also sent reinforcements. The Sultan of Granada and the King of Morocco, Abu al-Hasan Ali, mobilized to relieve the city. After 21 months of siege, Algeciras finally surrendered under the conditions that the citizens would be allowed to leave unharmed with their belongings, and that Granada would have to pay an annual tribute. In 1349, Alfonso went on to besiege Gibraltar. The end of the Reconquista was now within sight. Almost all of Spain had been recovered. However, another obstacle was in the way. In the year 1350, the Black Death came to Castilla and ravaged the Christian army, with the disease killing over 60% of the population in the Iberian Peninsula. Like many others, King Alfonso died. The 100 years after the Black Death were a disaster for Spain. Not only did they virtually not make any progress in the Reconquista, but the kings themselves were deficient, to say the least. I will make a summary of each so that you understand what state Spain was in at that time. King Pedro I was called the Cruel because he executed his relatives in very inhumane ways, such as hammering one to death in order to secure his throne. He lived in bigamy for 8 years until he killed his first wife. The situation was untenable, and after the Pope excommunicated him, his brother Enrique went to war against him and triggered a civil war. After a bloody conflict, Enrique finally trapped Pedro and stabbed him to death himself. Juan I became king in 1379, and basically spent his reign fighting against the Portuguese. He died in 1390 by falling down from his horse. His son and successor was 11 years old. His name was Enrique III, also called the Ailing, due to his poor health. Despite this, he was actually a successful king for the standards of the time. He supported a unique expedition to the Canary Islands on the coast of Africa and began its colonization and evangelization. The Canary Islands are still part of Spain today. To his great credit, he attempted to restart the conflict with the Moors of Granada, winning a victory at the Battle of Collajares. However, his illness and death prevented him from completing much more. His body was taken to Toledo, where he is still today in an impressive tomb. Enrique died leaving a 1-year-old son. As a result, his brother became regent for the moment. He is known as Fernando of Antequera, after he recovered Antequera from the Moors in 1410. The historian Warren Carroll summarizes this time period very well, saying, 101 years before the birth of Isabella, Castilla had had 5 kings, a monster of cruelty, Pedro, an illegitimate murderer, Enrique, a discredited failure, Juan I, a sickly boy, Enrique III, the Ailing, and Juan II. So long a period of weakness at the top had spawned a powerful, arrogant, rapacious nobility and shaken and confused ordinary people. The longest crusade had not been forgotten, but its torches burned low. In fact, Spain had the most corrupt court in all of Europe. Crime ravaged the land, with robbers amassing great wealth with total impunity, and poverty and famine struck ordinary people. It was to be in this environment of unhealthy corruption that in 1451 a baby was born. This baby would be known as one of the most influential women in history and one of the greatest queens that ever ruled a country. Her reign saw many accomplishments, namely the rise of Spain as a world superpower. She sponsored Columbus, who discovered America, reformed the church in Spain, who had lost its way, and conquered Granada, completing the Reconquista after a 770-year crusade. Her name is Isabella of Castilla, also known by Spaniards as the Catholic monarch.